Welcome to Potline Bling. I'm your host, JJ Coombs. My next guest is a board-certified pediatrician with more than 25 years of clinician experience. He has gained a national reputation for his expertise in holistic pediatric primary care. Today, he is one of only a few pediatricians in Florida qualified to evaluate and certify medical marijuana patients under the age of 18. Welcome, Dr. David Berger. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, Dr. David, right? That's what you go by?
I do.
So tell me a little bit about your background, how you got here. Let's hear your story.
Absolutely. So I'm a holistic pediatrician. Going back to the mid-90s when I did my residency at Tampa General, I became more interested in natural medicine. And with the Department of Pediatrics approval at Tampa General USF, I was allowed to start using herbs and supplements in the pediatric clinic there. At the time, there was very little information about how to actually dose these products. So I had to come up with individualized dosing regimens and things like that. So when it came around to medical cannabis being an option, while I realized most doctors would like totally freak out about that, I'd been putting together individualized treatment herbal protocols for a good 2 decades by then. And so for me, it was more just another herb and let's figure it out as opposed to what are we supposed to do?
So talking about dosing in cannabis, this is something that I really love to talk about. You know, my background is I have a PharmD. I took a tremendous interest in the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics of cannabis. How does this work with kids? How'd you come up with this? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk to families, I'm certainly, first of all, talking about the different cannabinoid options out there. In children, obviously, we're not getting flower, so we're not necessarily getting a full entourage effect because we can't use those types of products. And of course, having an understanding not just about THC and terpenes, but talking to them a lot about the other minor cannabinoids, CBD, CBG, CBGA, CBN, etc. One of the things that I always recommend doing is, although using a full spectrum product as much as possible, but I also don't like to use ratioed products. I don't like to use multi-combination products, and because I find that there's such distinct individuality that I, at least for starting off, like to bring in the different cannabinoids one at a time and then kind of see where I'm at. So, I've certainly taken an approach of a start very low, go very slow type of approach. That's especially true in THC. Although with the non-THC cannabinoids, I certainly go, a little higher and a little faster because I'm not nearly as worried of an intoxicating effect on them. But so I'll typically, for instance, if I'm dealing with a young child with THC, I mean, I'll be no more than 1 milligram as a starting point. So usually we have to do that as a tincture because even with edibles, even if you find a 5 milligram edible, how are you going to cut that in a fifth? So typically I use tinctures. I can get the most accurate dosing from that. And then I tell people within 3 days, if you haven't seen a difference, then increase it. And I, again, make a jump of 1 milligram. Older kids, I may start with 2. When I deal with adults, I'll typically, it depends on whether they have life experience or not. I'll, whether it's 2 on an inexperienced adult or 5 on up to 10 on an experienced dose. When we're talking about oral, obviously, when we're talking about inhaled, it's different.
So, I'm in the industry, so I'm very familiar with all these new cannabinoids that are being released. How do you keep up with all of this?
Well, I research, I learn. I like, I'm always trying to be on top of my game, and just it's a fascinating area for me. I certainly tell people, if you would have told me 10 years ago that I'd be allowed to give cannabis to my patients, I would have asked you what you're smoking. But but at the same time, again, it was just like one of those things that really just kind of came up for me. It was very natural. Let's put it that way. I'm a cannabis patient myself. So I do have life experience of kind of knowing how those things go. But in terms of these individual cannabinoids, you learn along the way. So, I've learned along the way that CBN is really helpful for sleep. I've learned along the way that CBGA is especially helpful for anti-inflammatory situations. And so, you learn, you try, you get feedback from patients. Whenever I, especially trying some new products out or new cannabinoids out, I solicit very specific feedback from my patients. I tell them, listen, I've heard about this. I haven't done it before. I'm a very transparent person. And so, give me feedback. Let me know what you think. Let me know what doses work for you. Of course, everybody's different, and so just one dose is certainly not a one size fits all. But at least it gives me that way of easing into things where I can start like seeing in my head what's working as I get that feedback.
Which cannabinoid would you say has been the most useful for your patients?
THC. I still say it would be THC. While I do recommend trying those other cannabinoids, and I've clearly had patients not need to use THC and get the therapeutic effect. But in my pediatric population in particular, the highest number of my patients, especially the younger ones, are kids with autism. And for what it does for the violent behaviors, for the irritability, the panic, the anxiety, the sleep, I've seen nothing like that in my career, and I've had a lot of successful treatments. But if you said to me which treatment is bringing the largest percentage of improvements, well, I'd probably say that, and treating with antifungals, candida yeast in the gut. That's probably number one and number two for me. But clearly, I mean, I've seen kids not have to be institutionalized. I've seen kids stop beating up their parents or stop beating themselves up and hitting their heads against the wall and able to sleep. And of course, when sleep is good, not just the function of the kid for the next day, but the whole household, obviously, everybody's functioning better if everybody's sleeping at night. So that's a lot to it. And the interesting thing that I have found, especially with kids with autism, and some of them are taking some pretty high doses of THC, it's very rare for them to look as if they're stoned. They just, I attributed this back to, Mechoulam in Israel had done a study. It was before COVID, so however many eons ago that was, where they actually did blood levels of the endocannabinoids, and he found that children with autism had lower natural endocannabinoids that they make than kids who don't have autism. So my hypothesis is that this is kind of like filling a gap in and hitting the endocannabinoid receptors in a way that another person who had enough of their own endocannabinoids might cup runneth over to where they feel that. That's not the experience that I get. I mean, most parents tell me their kids are sharper, that their attention and focus is better, which again, a lot of people, wow, pot's making your kid, I think the opposite would happen, but it's not so. And of course, that's when I start getting into the terpenes and my experience with using sativas, especially as a stimulant, and why stimulant medications work for ADD and those types of symptoms. So it's a lot like that.
So let's talk about sativas and indicas, because this is another topic I love to talk about. I'm more on the lab end where I produce distillates, right? So a lot of brands that I work with have sativa and indica when it comes to distillates, which you and I know that's not possible.
Yeah.
So you said you have experience with sativas. Is this coming from the flower?
Yeah. So on the flower sense, for sure. Okay. What I really more focus on is individual terpenes and terpene profiles. Using whether it's the Leafly terpene wheel or some of the other good resources that are out there. So as part of our education, so whenever I certify a patient in my office, they automatically then get handed over in office to my patient educator, who goes over some of these more details. Besides the ones who get them the card literally with their number and everything like that, we have a bunch of the dispensaries even have shelves in our office where we can kind of display and kind of show what the different types of products are, how to use a meter dose inhaler, which is obviously something most people aren't aware of, but it exists here. And so, but also part of this is explaining the terpenes. We share with them either terpene information, and we say, hey, look at these things, see if you notice that there are certain terpenes. And I'm a big believer in parent instincts. So if a parent does their research and this just sounds like the right thing for me, they're usually right. So I want to empower them. I want to enable them. I want to educate them so that they can say, oh, it sounds as if, I think my kid may do really well with limonene and linalool, as an example. Okay. So I will then say, well, when you're looking at products at the dispensary, if you're looking for, a strain specific type of thing, go to Leafly then and see, or one of the other sites, and see what the main terpenes are for that particular strain. And then at least you'll kind of be in the ballpark more of what you're looking for. You may notice my kid does really well with strain X, but they're out of that strain right now. What do? Well, I would then kind of reverse engineer that. go look for that particular strain. What terpenes is it that were the predominant ones there? Now let's find another strain for you or product for you that has those same terpenes. So even if it's not a flower thing, even if it's, when we deconstruct everything, we kind of put a tincture all back together or those types of things, at least you could be looking for products that are a little bit more specific, because the dispensary should be also be giving you that information too.
Yeah. Yeah. David, Dr. David, talk to me a little about Holistic ReLeaf.
Yes. So Wholistic ReLeaf is my medical cannabis clinic.
Mm-hmm.
I was the first pediatrician and really amongst the first handful of doctors in the state of Florida to be certified in the first place. So we do see adults as well as children. But our focus really is on complicated patients and on education. So, I mean, I've had plenty of septuagenarians and onward who have never used cannabis before, and they need a lot of hand-holding. If the time you're that age and you haven't used it before, it's probably because it was drilled into you that it was the devil weed. And so there's a little bit of talking through just kind of what that all means and explaining how with this low and slow approach that it's using CBD to counteract the intoxicating effects of THC. Why I say bring in CBD before you introduce the THC. So explain, hey, no, we can do this without, if you don't want to be getting high, we can accomplish this. This is how you do it. I'll explain. And if you did, tomorrow's a new day, go to sleep, you'll be fine the next day. But I actually had a patient once who did a concentrate. It was like a syringe, and they told her to do the old grain of rice, just a drop thing. But as you and I know, you can't get a small number of milligrams out of a syringe concentrate, no matter a drop. You can't get smaller than a drop. And that's going to be a ton for somebody, and that's what happened. And she took a lot. My estimate, she probably took about 100 milligrams. And her partner at the time called me up and said, hey, she's kind of comatose over here. I mean, and she happened to be around the corner from me, so I don't often make house calls, but I knew the family, so I went over there, and I brought my CBD pen. The only time in my entire career where I shared another product with somebody else, since I knew it was law, but I knew it was just CBD. And she was at least, but she couldn't answer most basic questions. What's the day of the week? Where is somebody at? Who's the president of the United States? I mean, they were not able to give me those kind of answers. She wasn't able to. And so, she was breathing. I could assess she looked comfortable. I could tell she wasn't in any distress. So I didn't think this was emergency room type of thing, but she was able to breathe. And I was able to talk to coach her through, hey, just take a few hits off of this CBD vape pen. And sure enough, about 10 minutes later, she kind of starts to come to, and hey, David, what are you doing here? I'm like, actually, I've been here for quite a while already. Let me ask you some basic questions. And, I'm asking her these questions. Like, why are you asking me this question? I'm like, you couldn't answer these questions 10 minutes ago. And so after learning about the antidote, if you will, using CBD, I was able to see it firsthand and work. And wow, did it turn her around? And I left my vape cartridge there with her and, used it a few more times. I got a phone call from her partner a little while later. And next thing you know, everything's back in business.
I actually have a funny story. I go to these trade shows all the time in the industry, and I was at this show, and somebody gave me a gummy, and he's like, "It's undosed." I'm like, okay, cool. I'll try it. I ate the whole thing, and I'm like, dude, this is not undosed. I could taste the cannabinoids, the distillate in my mouth. He comes back to me, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that was 250 milligrams." For me, that's a lot. I'm a big baby. 10 milligrams, and I'm sleeping. And most people don't know this, but CBD is like an antidote for this. So I ended up eating like 50 CBD gummies, and I felt fine. And typically, if I had eaten a dose like that, I probably would have been like seeing dragons and freaking out with my heart racing. So that's I'm glad that you educate your patients with that. I want to talk about two other things. So one, dosing with CBD. I don't remember where I read this. But you can probably help me with this, that in order to have efficacy with CBD, you need to have at least 1,000 milligrams.
I would significantly question that source. So one of my very first patients in clinic, 75-year-old man, fell off his bike like when he was a teenager, was having seizures daily, multiple times a day, came to me on 3 different seizure medications. Okay, let's start CBD, go from there. He was really not wanting to be doing THC unless it was absolutely necessary. 10 milligrams CBD twice a day within 3 days, completely stopped this man's seizures.
Wow.
Within by the time I saw him the next time, he was off of it, off of 2 of his 3 seizure medications and weaning the third, and never had to go up past 10 milligrams twice a day. So
Wow.
it's just so not a one size fits all. I've never given anybody that number of milligrams. It's interesting because if you look at the Epidiolex medication, that's the prescription strength CBD isolate with sucralose sweetener.
Hmm.
The milligram per kilogram that's listed for that is astronomical that the FDA has approved. They recommend starting off at 2.5 milligrams twice a day. If you're a 110-pound person, you're talking about 100 milligrams twice a day. And I would never start anybody in that. And they say you can go up to 4 times that amount, and that they've proven that it's safe. It's FDA approved for that. So that at least tells me that they know that we're not, and I know I'm not doing harm with anybody with that. But when people come to me with hey, this is the dosing that I've seen, it's like, you might be there, but you're probably not getting to be there.
Well, I also think the route of administration affects this, right? Like if it's a tincture versus a gummy where it needs to be
Mm-hmm.
metabolized, I think that kind of changes things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably also, again, like what we talked about, subjective, right? Based on the individual. And it's also based on what you're trying to treat, right? Maybe you need a higher dosage for inflammation in your joints versus seizures.
Right. Yeah. And it's just so variable that way. But it's a matter of just figuring out what a person needs. And you have to take some time with it. Part of what we do at Wholistic ReLeaf. So even though the certification is good for 7 months, my patient educator and I, we are available at no cost during that entire 7 months for questions that come up. And I'll tell them, hey, if we need to, I've gotten really good at med management, if you will. If somebody can tell me what they're taking, how much, the good and the bad and the ugly of what's working, what's not for them, and they tell me what to do, I can make adjustments. I can tell them, well, let's try this particular product, and let's try this way instead, and let's try dosing it that way. And I can I tell people I can do med management with cannabis the way that like psychiatrists and pain meds do with their pharmaceuticals. So,
Yeah.
it's a matter of being available for the patient also. You can't, thankfully this isn't as much of a pill mill situation as we saw for pill mills. But let's face it, there are definitely some centers who do certifications but they're not really offering any support. And hey, listen, if you're a person who had been using cannabis successfully, self-medicating for years, you know what you need to do. You want to make sure you're getting a pure product that's not laced, and you want to make sure you have a card so that you don't get in trouble. Although we get those patients as well. Obviously, that's a person who doesn't need an experienced doctor who can spend the time with you and have the support staff available to help you during all of those times. But to me, that's something that's super important.
So you've heard of the different THC derivatives that have been out on the market, right? Delta 8, Delta
Yeah.
6A, 10A, Delta 10, Delta 3, all these things. So I know that like from a psychoactivity level, that these are not as psychoactive as Delta 9. Would you ever consider incorporating these into your treatment?
That's a really good question. So as a physician who is certifying, who knows that his medical license is on the line if I accidentally put my toe into the water the wrong way, I am certainly much more really trying to focus on just for any of those tea products, on focusing on products from the dispensaries. So one of the dispensaries has had some Delta 8 available, but I'm certainly not comfortable sending somebody off to a smoke shop and God only knows what's in it. The law requires with the QR code that it lists how much THC is in it, but there's nothing that says that you have to show the impurities, that you have to show what else is in there. And so it's something that I'm familiar with. I've studied I've studied about it, but it's not something that I've taken the direction of my career. People, oh, you can just carry it in your office because it's not. I'm like, I'm comfortable carrying CBD in my office and the CBG and the CBN and the CBGA, but I am absolutely not comfortable carrying any of those derivatives of THC in my office.
I think being in this industry and having a lab in this industry, I agree that there's a lot of bad players. I've noticed that as the industry has progressed and the prices drop down and it's become more commoditized, the people that were doing it in Home Depot buckets are no longer doing it because it's not profitable, right? One of the things that I've seen, at least when analyzing these different cannabinoids, is when you say like impurities, what I see on my HPLCs are just other cannabinoids that we don't have standards for.
Mm-hmm.
If it's done in a safe environment and, it's done the right way, you use, real chemistry to do it, I think that there's some tremendous therapeutic properties and applications for all these different kinds of derivatives. There's one that we've been working on for a while. It's called MEO-THC, and it has a tremendous binding affinity to the CB2. Supposedly, the papers that are out right now say that it's an awesome analgesic, and it's great for anti-inflammatory. But it's difficult because obviously doing studies costs a lot of money. And it's legally federally compliant. So it's like, what would you recommend a company like mine do to test products like this that we use sound chemistry, and we obviously do full panels and do all that?
Yeah. So I mean, the main thing that I'm also interested is just making sure, obviously, you would know what you're growing and how you're growing it. But I do like to make sure that somebody's independently testing for pesticides, for heavy metals, for mold, mycotoxins, etc. That's what I just want to make sure that I'm not giving you something that's actually harmful. We know, although I haven't heard it done here, we know one of the issues with Chinese herbs is like, I mean, in order to speed up the drying process, that they'll like use car exhaust in order to dry them faster. And like over there, they still have leaded gasoline, so like, just like things like that you'd be like, come on, really? But they do happen, there one of the supplement companies that I've worked with, it turned out that when they were making their herbal and supplements in a liquid form, and I found several of my patients when I was doing heavy metal detoxing on, I started seeing high antimony levels in them. Turns out it was in the stevia that they were using for the sweetener. So when the raw materials all tested negative, this was like the quote unquote additive, the natural, healthy alternative. And it was in the stevia, heavy metal with stevia. And they actually then got checked 11 different national brands. 7 of the 11 brands had this antimony metal in there. So just things like that can just happen. So I just like to, as they say, cross my T's and dot my I's.
This is one of those things that people give a bad rap to the hemp side of the industry. I got to tell you, I've had to send full panels, all the COAs and everything into all of the individual states that we want to sell to. And we spend a lot of money on testing. And there's a lot of companies that don't have the same, stringent regulations or rules. And, we are the ones that get the bad rap.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, obviously it's something new. And so, and let's face it, thankfully, what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, just in terms of the acceptance of all of these types of products in our country, I mean, again, can look at where things were 20 years ago, right, compared to now. I mean, it's been a mountain of change that's happened in between now and then, because we know that the good actors, and I can direct people to the good actors, so that's what I tell a patient. I mean, like, if there's a company, see if they're on their website, are they openly displaying their certificate of analysis there for you? See how old that certificate analysis is. How often are they checking the batches? If there's one from this year and then one from 3 years ago, they either know something or they're not checking very often. But if you have a company where it seems like several times a year and every single batch is being shown up there, they're doing their homework and they're doing the right thing. So that's part of the education process.
It is. One thing that we've really been trying to do as a company is educate patients how to read a certificate of analysis. I remember when I first got into this, I had just finished school and I didn't know what the heck I was reading, and coming from, a graduate program and all that, it was difficult for me at the time. So, we really got to break this down for the patients and help them understand how to read things. I saw a post on Reddit the other day talking about the uncertainty levels and standard deviations of the labs. And they're like, well, what is this? How can a lab be uncertain about this? What am I really doing? It's like, hey, look, this is just standard. There's going to be variances and it's cool to be part of a new industry that is changing at such a rapid pace.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, I mean, if you look what's showing up in pharmaceuticals, I mean, generics only have to have 80% of what the label says compared to the brand name. I mean,
Yep.
I mean, like the reality is that the good players in our field are doing a better job than big pharma.
Yeah, yeah, and then I use that as an argument all the time. That's one of the things that I use generics, and one thing too is people talk about synthetics and semi-synthetics and what's safe and what's not safe, and this is my personal opinion, but if something is made the right way and it's nature identical and it's high purity and you run all the lab analysis, I mean, I would say that that's just as safe, if not safer, than something that was grown with pesticides, heavy metals, and they didn't
Yeah,
treat that right.
right.
I like to compare also like vitamin C. There's synthetic vitamin C and there's natural vitamin C, and they're in products at CVS, Walgreens, and are you ever going to question that? I mean, I feel like they don't get the same scrutiny that our
No.
industry gets, but
Mm.
it comes with the territory, right?
Right. So, when we talk, like bioidentical, I mean, obviously, it's a thing in the hormone industry, when we in wellness and hormones. And of course, big pharma's trying to stop that because God forbid we get something that's more identical to it. But, so, it's tough. But again, thankfully good actors are rising to the top, if you will.
Agreed. So, Dr. David, can you tell me a little bit about during the COVID-19 pandemic, you were invited to share your expertise with FDA. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So you think about regarding the vaccines, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I have I've always been of the philosophy informed consent. What's the potential benefit versus what's the potential risk, or pro versus con versus the alternatives that are out there. Okay. And so and I've also always taken a very significant approach that people should have a choice and a right to do with their bodies what they think is right. And so, when I talked to them the first time, so this was when they were doing the first approval for the fight for Pfizer. My main push for them was like, you need to be transparent. You need to be open. It's okay to say, we don't know the answer to that. This is something stinking brand new, but
Mhm.
don't try to oversell something, because people see through that. And what you're going to see is there's going to be more pushback the more that you make statements that are being displayed as facts when they're actually opinions. People appreciate you to say, I don't know for sure about that. How would we have possibly known that? So that was really where my first presentation was. As I made further presentations, so I think I did it 3 or 4 times total. When I was talking about kids, I was trying, very much explaining they're not just little adults. There's other things with their immune systems that react differently. Um, of course, we knew by the time that they were approved by kids, for kids, and I'm fully supportive of people who choose to do it. I've done it for myself, or my family's been vaccinated, for it. So, but again, recognizing that some people are going to say, hey, I need more data. Hey, I'm not going to be the first guinea pig here. Respect those people. That was the other thing. Don't disparage people. Don't point at them and call them idiots because they're not aligned with what you're saying. That's going to just drive people away. And if your goal is to try to bring them on board, if you're being more neutral with them and say, hey, we think that this is great, maybe you will too, as opposed to you're an idiot, kind of like how it was with ivermectin. I mean, I haven't seen any evidence that it really works. I think it's safe, but that's to be, you need more than that to treat somebody. But I mean, they were making this people out, oh, you're taking a horse dewormer. Well, yeah, it's used for that, but it's also been FDA approved for human use, and
Uh-huh.
again, not to get too far in that direction, but that was just an example about, how people were just completely disparaged if it was something that they were contemplating. Granted, if they were taking horse paste out of a feed store, that's different than going to your local pharmacy and getting the milligram exact dose that's been FDA approved. So, just things like that. For me, it's all about educating people, giving them the information so that they can make the best choices for themselves.
Correct. Dr. David, it's been an absolute pleasure having you today on the podcast. If any of you listeners want to find out some more information about Dr. David and what he does, you can visit him at drdavidmd.com. If you're interested in looking at the clinic, it's holisticrelief.com. That's spelled with the W. And there's also holisticfamilycare.com. If you have any closing statements or anything you want to say, Dr. David, now would be the time.
Yeah, no, thanks. I do have a YouTube channel also, so a lot of these types of topics, I do three shows a week. So they're usually typically short 5 to 10 minute episodes. But I'm going through all medical cannabis. Well, COVID's kind of taken over a lot of that over the past couple of years. But yeah, so I really try to I have a Patreon page as well. We've converted some of them into podcasts for people who want things in an audio format. But really, my focus is on health, education, and choice. And so I think that that's what people want. And I tell people, how you may not agree with me. In fact, there's nobody should 100% agree with me all the time. That's just too robotic. But I want to give people something to think about. I want them to ask me questions, ask follow. That helps me think better. That helps me become a better doctor too.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Dr. David, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I want to thank the listeners here on Potline Bling. You can find all of our episodes on cannabisradio.com. Please rate the show, subscribe, like. You can find us at iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll talk to you on the next one.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.